Floresville Independent School District is on the cusp of instituting random drug testing for approximately 100 students per year in an effort to quell drug use by punishing offending students with suspension from extracurricular activities and other privileges, driving on campus, things like that. Mixed reactions are coming from parents, and that demonstrates an absence of a cohesive response from the community. Some parents welcome the measure, other parents find it invasive, and some are more concerned about funding and if the money should be allocated to a drug program when the school could use help in other areas. In any case, surrounding communities do have implementations in place just like this, and they're not showing any progress in their performance, which leaves one to ponder is if this move is even necessary. I'll discuss this with the panel. The story is from San Antonio Express News by Melissa Mano on June 24th, 2024. Rob, I don't necessarily have a problem with this. I see a lot of benefits to something like this, and I'm just wondering, is this an idea that you couldn't get behind?
I think this is the very classic, I think their heart's in the right place, but I just don't think it's going to work. So, for example, you said that other schools have things like this in place, and it doesn't seem to work, which is evidence that it doesn't work. So don't do it. There's the opportunity cost in that. The real problem that I have with it is that it is purely punitive. If you test positive, then what is it? Quote, punishment for failing a drug test will vary, but first-time offenders will face a 15 instructional day suspension from games, performances, and events, and as well as from parking on campus. A second failed test will come with a 30-day suspension, and the punishment increases to 90 days for a failed test. And the point of school is to learn. You can't do that if you're not there. So, I get it, but just it's done incorrectly. It's only punitive.
But the suspension is not from school. The suspension is from the extracurricular activities. Or if you have a parking pass at school, you won't be able to park at school or drive to school. And in those offenses, they offer counseling, drug counseling. Is that not the right way to treat this? And I want to get your take on that real quick, but then I want to move to Eli because I know Eli has some thoughts about rehabilitative behavior as well.
Well, the counseling is nice, but ultimately, do we all remember the DARE program that was so famously bad it actually rose teen smoking? They have so many other problems to deal with, the fact that all of the tests are down and students are worse than ever. We've still not reached a pre-COVID time. So the evidence shows that it's not useful. It's purely punitive, and there's just better things to be spending our time on. I don't think it's worth it.
Eli, your thoughts on that?
So I'm kind of in the same camp as Rob. I think that it was really the fact that it was punitive that stuck with me. I think if you're interested in making sure kids are smart decisions, making sure they're, being healthy, not getting into trouble or getting themselves hurt, that's one thing. For example, I had a teacher when I was young that stopped me after class one time and was like, "Hey man, what you do outside of school isn't my business, but drop your hoodie in your locker." And it was because it smelled like weed, and he was just trying to hook me up. He's like, he didn't think there was any reason for me to get in trouble. He just thought that hey man, be smart. If you're gonna do it, you're here, you're doing your work, you're not causing trouble, you're doing what you're supposed to do while you're here, but just be smart and don't get in trouble. And if that was the attitude that it seemed like this school was taking with this sort of testing, that would be one thing. But I'm with Rob, and I don't see it that way. It seems punitive.
Well, you guys were very delicate in your approach, and I know that Kelly has a soft spot for protecting the kids, and I can see him fuming at the ears. So, Kelly, if you will, let me know, what do you think about this measure?
I think this is bullshit. I think it's complete and utter bullshit. And here's why. Because they couldn't do this at a college. Why couldn't they? Because they're adults and it's fucking unconstitutional. But it's okay to do it to kids. And I think that's bullshit. How come everybody gets rights but kids don't? Why? And are they clearing this with the parents first? I don't think they are. Right? Are they making sure that all the parents are on board with my kids might get drug tested at any point? And And one of my big problems with drug testing is, let's face it, this is not a drug test. This is a marijuana test. Almost all the other drugs are out of your system and not to be tested within 48 hours. This is a marijuana test, something that is now legal in a majority of the United States in one way or another. So yeah, this is all bullshit from step one to the end.
All right. So I'm just going to open this up for open dialogue because I hear a lot of things that I don't necessarily agree with. And I want to harken back. Number one, Rob, this is not pure, and Eli, this is not purely punitive. It is punitive, but there are multiple opportunities for kids to overcome their punishment and get back into it, right? And get back their privileges, number one. And then on the other note, do kids get rights? I don't think that kids necessarily deserve the same rights as adults. Now, that's a separate conversation in a way, but we as a society have not defined accurately what it means to be an adult, right? You can vote, you can go die for your country, you can't buy alcohol. And alcohol is legal, but not to kids. Smoking cigarettes is legal, but not to kids. So even if marijuana is legal, what is so bad about testing students whose focus should be school, whose focus should be learning, whose focus should be playing on a team sport, whose focus should be staying in the right frame of mind to enhance themselves personally and maybe even professionally, and so that they're not doing adult things. I don't know that I would necessarily have a problem with this if it were my kid. However, I'm not totally sold. And so I'd like to take comments from the panel. Excuse me, Rob, please indulge us.
So the reason why I don't love this specific one is because it is punitive, and yes, they get to talk to a counselor and stuff like that. But like I said earlier, I work with kids, and when I work with kids, sometimes I work with parents who suck, and it is very often the case that the kid is cooler than the parents. And fun fact, I'm a mandatory reporter. So what ends up happening is if I know there's a problem going on at home, or I heavily suspect one, then it's very easy to be like, hey, let me deal with this, and in some way talking to the parents or punish the kid because they're acting and behaving in such a way. But here's the thing. When they come to my place where they are, it's safe. And even if it's worse to have them, and I need to treat them especially because kids do have rights, and they have in fact so many that we have mandatory reporters. That is like, special pleading is only fallacious when you can't establish the reason why it's special, and turns out kids can't consent, and they shouldn't because they don't know things. So I want them to come to me because I know they're in a better place here. But in that case, I don't then punish them for having come to me. I want them in the school.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent point. But so Eli, I want to move on to you, and Rob, forgive me. I'm going to take a point that you made, and I want to move on to Eli for a second and say, Rob is making the point that kids don't know things, right? Isn't that exactly why we have different rules for kids than we do for adults? And shouldn't we treat kids as if they need the guidance and they need somebody to look out for them? And is this rule not doing that? Eli, your thoughts on that?
So yeah, I agree. I think one of the big things is that one of the things that helps me stay patient with my son is like he's still learning the rules for the world that he was brought into without any say in the matter. He's just trying to figure out the rules that I've had 32 years to figure out, and he's only had 6. So I appreciate the idea of like, let's help children, learn how to make, good choices. And And much like Rob said, I don't like the idea of manufacturing consequences for kids. Like I don't have the experience of an educator, but I want my son to come to me and tell me when there's a problem. Like, hey, Dad, I messed up and I need help because something bad could happen, or like whatever the case may be. Even if it's not that serious, I don't want him to be afraid that he's going to be punished for like admitting that he made a mistake. I don't want to be punished when I make mistakes. Like it's just a mistake. Everyone does. So I don't want someone else to come and give me a hard time about it. And I think when you have these punitive responses to like a failed drug test, then you're just teaching the kids how to get away with it and not to get caught. so that if something bad does happen, or if they really are experiencing like health threatening addiction, they're not going to want to come and seek that help because they're just afraid of getting in trouble. When you're a teenager, when you're a kid, getting in trouble is like for me, it was one of the worst possible things. I couldn't stand it. So I would rather hide that something was wrong than ask for help. And that's what I don't want to see happen to these kids.
Kelly, you mentioned that this wouldn't fly in colleges because college students are adults and they have rights. But colleges are also businesses. They lose money if they take measures like this. But it's still unconstitutional. You can't just randomly drug test people without their to make it so that they can go to a state-run college. Mm-hmm. I mean, sure, a private business can do that through their insurance companies, but the state can't do that. And that's already gone to the Supreme Court, where they've already said there's only certain jobs where it's dependent on you not doing drugs, like airline traffic controllers or on over-the-road truck drivers that work for the government. Those people can be tested because their job depends on them being straight at work. What about students that are operating motor vehicles on school property, or that are
that's a function of their employment, not of them being a student.
So why doesn't the school have any right to have greater concern for kids that are potentially participating in contact sports or operating motor vehicles? I mean, this is not affecting everybody, really. This is affecting the students.
Yeah, and think about this. Think about the kids that are doing extracurricular activities, right? They're not the kids that are having drug problems. The kids that are smart enough to have their own car and work and afford their own car and drive to school. These aren't the kids that are having drug problems. You are actually going after the very kids who are just the opposite of what the problem is.
Well, I think that is a pretty sweeping statement to say that kids that drive don't have their own problems.
I'm just saying that if the kids are responsible enough to be able to do that, I'm not saying they're not doing drugs. Yeah. I'm saying they're not having a drug problem, and there's a big difference between the two things.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the input. I want to jump back over to Rob and see, Rob, where are we as far as consent being given? So the school is saying, hey, parents, you're giving consent by signing the student handbook. So shouldn't the school have the right to operate this policy or enforce this policy if parents are in fact giving consent?
Yeah, that's just easy. Kids under 18 don't have the power to consent to things generally, and that's because they have legal guardians. By the way, we don't want to live in a world where kids consent to things, because then dinner is always ice cream and Piggy's glasses break. So we need to that's the two of you out there will get that. But so we just need to make rules for kids, and then some of them are going to be, hey, don't do drugs. But here's the thing. I'm not even like an anti-drug person, similar to what I was saying earlier. And I agree to an extent with Kelly, where it's like, yeah, you did drugs, but it's not a problem. I could quit anytime I want. So, but like, we want to get the kids who need help. But the problem is that by making them exit, by suspending them for any amount of time, you then don't have access to them. And these are the kids who demonstrably need the most help, which is why I said the reason why I don't like it is because it is clearly written punitively to only harm the kids and to punish them, rather than to use it as a tool of understanding their student body and putting resources where needed. That would require people to know what they're doing, and we already know what they're doing to the educators.
Again, I think we're hung up on this suspension idea being a suspension from school. It's only a suspension from their sport. It's only a suspension
Why
from
is that
the
relevant?
band.
That's not
because
relevant.
They're still accessible. They're still accessible, right? So they're still accessible. They're still able to learn. I would just say,
I want to know if I, as the parent, do not consent to this being done to my child.
I would like to know that too. And what are the options? Yeah. Are the parents expected to pull the kids out of school? Right. And that's something that would require clarification. I don't think that I'm 100% for this policy, but I can see where it could do some good. I'm not anti-drug. I'm not anti-marijuana. But I am of the mindset that the United States has done a poor job in defining what separates a child from an adult. And, you know, I do think that children require a little bit more hands-on guidance. And Eli, I want to jump back to you. What about the fact that the kids get counseling? Maybe this is a way to identify the kids that need the counseling and put them on that right path. Any comments there?
Yeah, so I agree. And I had some thoughts about that too. Some kids are at a greater risk for addiction. There's, genetic markers that are predispositions for, neurospicy kids like me, like, we chase dopamine. So like, anything that gives you a dopamine hit, you can get addicted to like crazy. Like I drink caffeine, like nobody's business, just for the dopamine. But to kind of something that I was thinking earlier, I remember it's been a while since I've been in high school, but I don't remember my parents signing my student handbook. My student handbook was for me, the student, and I signed the student handbook. I don't know if my parents gave some consent to say like, yes, my child's signature in the student handbook can serve as, I don't think anything like that happened. So as I understand it, if it's just these students signing this handbook, those that are not 18 cannot consent to these drug tests. And that's where I think that was the other kind of big issue for me. It was, and I recognize like if they are using counseling services as well, and the suspension isn't from school premises, it's just from extracurriculars, that's different from how I understood it at first. But the other hang up I had was that I just don't think any legal agent has given consent for these tests if the parents have not signed the handbooks. And I think there's better ways to address drug prevention and drug counseling for those who are at risk than invading privacy with bogus consent.
Kelly, is there not a benefit to a policy like this as far as intervention, early intervention, drug counseling? What are some of the things that you might bite off on, if you will?
I'm going to go back to what I said before. These aren't the kids that have a drug problem. And I'm going to stand by it. I'll die on that hill. Because drug problems mean you can't deal with society. You're not going to be able to deal with school. The kids who are having a drug problem are not going to be on the football team. They're not going to be going to the chess club meetings. You're going to know who these kids are. They're the kids who are going to be ditching school. They're going to be not in class. With these drug tests, we're going after exactly the wrong kids. All right, let's say the kid on the football team last Friday smoked a joint with everybody else. He still did fine in school. He doesn't have a drug problem. He's not fucking driving to school high. And yet now he has a drug test. It's shown to his parents that he got high. Now the kid's in trouble with his parents, all because he smoked one joint one Saturday evening while he was out hanging with his friends. And he doesn't have a drug problem, and now it has turned into a problem for him.
I agree with that point.
Go ahead,
but
Bob.
how do you know what is your criteria that creates drug problem? How do I make that distinction?
And now I'm speaking from my own experience, right? Because I had a drug problem. I spent the first half of my adult life with a drug problem because I was suffering from PTSD, right? And it was the PTSD drove me not only to do drugs, but it made it so that I could not function in society, not only because of the PTSD, but also because of the drugs. And I think that's when it becomes a problem. When you can't live a normal life, when you can't be responsible, when you can't pay your bills, when you would rather spend your money on drugs than on your phone bill, it becomes a problem. That is a drug problem, as opposed to somebody, we don't have a problem with somebody who comes home and has a couple of beers every night. We don't think that that's a problem.
I do if it's a seventh grader. I do if it's a child.
And with this is good because it hits to the point of the double standard of alcoholism is far more forgiving than anything else in America.
So go ahead, Eli.
Well, I was going to say you had a good point. And the other thing that I don't know has been touched on that you brought up a couple of times, and I don't think you've gotten a good response to it, is like the driving on campus. If there's a student that's under the influence driving on campus, that is a danger to the other kids. But I think that should be, and of course you don't want to wait until something bad happens to stop something bad from happening, right? It comes down to, I guess, preemptive punishment, pre-punishment, I guess, so to speak. Like, well, just in case you're going to go do this thing later, we're going to punish you now. I think there are ways. I think that is something that should be addressed, and it's a valid point. But I wonder if there are different or better ways.
Rob, go ahead.
Well, the whole driving to campus thing is a useful point because it's about their interaction with society. And so I agree with that, right? Because like we don't want people inebriated being harmful in a setting such that they're around people that they could harm. Things like team sports and themselves interacting with other people. So like, if I am extremely charitable, I can kind of see what they're going for, which is, oh, you are doing drugs, or you did a drug. Clearly, it is going to be harder for you to be around people. Mm-hmm. And people tend to do team sports. So like, I don't think that's extremely charitable. And I really don't think the spirit of what they're going for, but I can at least get to that point and say, the rest of your shit wasn't punitive. I might have considered that for you.
So, and on that note, Rob, I'm gonna try and be charitable here. And look, I've said before, I don't know that I'm 100% sold on this, although I'm trying to see the benefits. But let me just come away from that and be charitable the other direction and say, this is the atheist community of Austin. We consistently report on and take calls about and discuss instances where religious ideologues and government are imposing their will on children. And that is not a good thing, right? You don't want to take advantage of people who have less rights and start imposing your way of life on them unnecessarily, especially. And to that point, we already have laws in place, right? People are not supposed to drive inebriated. I don't know what would make the school the enforcer of that. We already have a police force. We already have state and local governments to take care of that. There are coaches and there are parents that should be actively parenting and should be actively involved in the kid's life to be able to intervene and say, hey, maybe you don't play today, or maybe there's something going on with you. It shouldn't take random drug testing to do that. And so I could be charitable in that sense and say, let's leave the kids alone. This 17-year-old that's about to graduate high school can go die for his country or her country, but can't smoke a joint. And I think that's unfair. So all of this to say, right, we are in a society with an extreme ambiguity on what rights children have. And what we define as an adult. Is it 18? Is it 21? Is it 25 in some cases, and what can or can't they do? And I just think that this is a good conversation for it. And I'll take any last comments if anybody wants to say anything before we wrap it up. All right. Go ahead, Rob.
I think people should open their hearts to the idea that children cannot consent.
Yeah, I think
that's really at the end of it. They don't know things. And this is why I said earlier, like, if it was less punitive, they should be allowed to make mistakes. Earlier, you said, like, when I was a teenager, I would get in trouble. And I really thought you were going to say, when I was a teenager, I made mistakes, because I literally teach my staff, not only do we want the kids to make mistakes, but we're going to actually create situations wherein they will make mistakes. That way we can teach them how to overcome mistakes. Mm-hmm. And so there is great value in actually finding out the people who are doing things that are maybe not useful. And I agree ultimately that doing a drug a couple times isn't going to be a problem. But like, we already don't know how to make that decision and make that line, and none of us here are going to be able to know that. So just at the end of the day, I get where they're coming from. Children can't consent, but that doesn't mean it's perfect and good and helpful.
All right. Well,
I just want to say one thing. I've learned far more from my mistakes than I have from my successes. They have made who I am today. So,
absolutely. Well, this is a great discussion. This was a little bit unorthodox for the nonprofits because we really didn't have to relate religion to it at all, and we usually do. But this is important. This is children's rights. This is rights in general, which is definitely a secular humanist cause and something that we need to be cognizant of and constantly discuss. And folks, if you're watching, you can click the link below to find more discussions on our rights and our causes. Stay tuned.